Broadcasting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City, here is Steve Malzberg.
Hello, I'm Dennis Neal in for Steve today. And now joining us, we've got the former U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. Ambassador Francis Rooney is here. He has an interesting USA Today column arguing that relations between the U.S. and the Vatican are just a little bit cool. They're cordial but cooling. And he joins us now. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Ambassador. And go ahead and make your case, sir.
Well, thank you for having me on, Dennis. Yeah, the point of that article was to show that after since the time of President Reagan establishing diplomatic-level relations in 1983, and despite the many important contributions of Holy See diplomacy, under the 6 years of President Obama, the relationship had become fairly attenuated and was cool. He had not made a state visit at that time, and only just recently made his first state visit, which was in March, where I think he sought to leverage some of the Pope's economic and social justice commentaries, perhaps to support his own domestic agenda.
Yeah, they would seem rather simpatico, which is why the notion that relations between the U.S. and the Vatican have been cooling in the Obama era is so surprising to me, especially since the appointment of Pope Francis, who's kind of made part of his brand, if you'll allow me to use a word like that, defending the poor, and he lived a very simple life in Latin America. Now, this one single visit by our president to the Vatican in 6.5 years in office, I believe it is, roughly, how does that compare with previous presidents? I mean, how many times did George W. Bush visit the Vatican in 2 terms?
Well, I think George W. has the record. I think he was like 6 or 7 times. But almost every other president's made at least 2 visits to the Pope, or vice versa, had the Pope to the United States.
Yes.
And, I'm going to be hopeful, though, and look forward and hope that now President Obama and I certainly think Secretary Kerry gets it, that there is a lot of opportunity for common leverage and pursuing common objectives with the Holy See.
Yeah, well, I want to go in 2 directions. I want to know what the upside is to have relations with the Vatican at all. I mean, he's a religious leader, not a political leader, and yet you point out that there are very real advantages. And in fact, let's start there and tell me about that. Why do we need good relations with the Vatican? I mean, he's leading Catholics. He's not leading the country.
Well, that's why I wrote the book, to show that the diplomacy of the Holy See, the role the Holy See has played in international affairs, is very important, has had valuable contributions to the Western world, certainly valuable contributions to the foreign policy of the United States, which is based on similar values, and that it transcends just Catholics, that a diplomacy based on supporting human dignity, the natural rights of man, and religious freedom is something that should appeal to all countries who want a good government and to provide good opportunities to their citizenry. And the Holy See is uniquely positioned to weigh in that area because it has soft power, resulting from the fact that it's the only clearly recognized sovereign entity in the world with no territory.
Yes, well, you also point out in your USA Today column that one reason President Reagan opened relations or actually appointed an ambassador to the Holy See, as that post technically is known, is because he realized that the Polish Pope would be a good ally to have as we try to undermine the Soviet Union. And certainly that did work out in a political sense, didn't it?
It certainly did, and in my book I put the quote from Premier Gorbachev where he said, quote, "Everything that happened in Eastern Europe would have been impossible without the Pope," unquote. And I also went in there to some of the GRU and KGB's internal memos that have been found and declassified, where it talks about the files that they kept on the Pope before he became Pope, when he was first made the Bishop of Warsaw. And they were watching this guy because they knew he was going to be bad news for communism.
Which was, you know what, isn't this Pope also the one that was remember there was an assassination attempt? I think during the Reagan era there was an assassination attempt on the Pope. He was actually shot. Remember that?
Yeah, he was shot, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding on whether Russian or other kind of
some Bulgarian or something
working through the Bulgarians were behind it. I kind of went through both sides of that in the book. Yeah,
that's quite interesting. Now, on these cooling relations between the Obama administration and the Vatican, whose fault is it? Is it because the Pope doesn't like us, because the Obama administration has that new policy forcing even Catholic churches to provide birth control financing for health care to their employees? Or is it that the Obama folks are upset at the Pope for being maybe a little critical of that policy? Who's the hater here?
Well, I think it's really a little more generic than that. I think the coolness towards the Holy See began with the beginning of the administration, because the administration's a pretty secular orientation. President Obama wrote a book where he basically said there are no absolute truths in the modern era, which would tend to say that there's no religion. And so he just doesn't look at religion as a stabilizing force in society, and the Holy See does. And historically, there's a lot of evidence that religion is a very important stabilizing influence in society and is necessary for the long-term creation of a good government and stability.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting argument. I mean, even for atheists, you got to wonder whether actually at least a lot of religion tries to tell people to lead a good life and to lead a moral life, and certainly not much wrong with that kind of message, right?
No, that's right, and a lot of the church doctrines that go back, breaking that down, going back through the natural rights of man and the need for people to realize there's some power greater than them as a check on the excesses of humanity. I had an atheist girl one time say, "Why should I read your book?" I said, "If you believe in human rights and you believe in freedom, you better read my book."
Huh. I hope she bought it. Let's move on to the Pope's recent trip to the Middle East. Now, there's a region where, frankly, it would occur to the non-Pope follower that maybe he'd have very little clout there in the Middle East. You've got Muslims, they have the clout in the Middle East. You've got the Jews that are under attack by many of their neighbors in the Middle East. But Pope Francis went there. He was talking about ending world hunger and poverty by the year 2025. What did you think of the Pope on tour?
Well, I think there's some controversial elements to it. I think he covered a lot of ground in a few days, and I think he showed that from a diplomatic point of view, the Holy See's got a strong voice. You may not always agree with it, and I know certainly there are some in Israel that didn't agree with him stopping at that wall, but the fact is he's got Abbas and President Perez coming to have a prayer session with him in June, and he talked strongly about the need for tolerance and inclusion in the Middle East and the ending of the persecution of all people, Jews and Christians alike. And those are important principles that only he can express. I
might be a little behind the headlines here, Mr. Ambassador, but I thought that the Pope had said, hey, it'd be really great if the Israeli leader and the Palestinian leader came together and we all prayed together. I didn't realize that the two leaders had actually agreed to do that. Have they agreed to show up and do that?
Yeah, they're going, it's like mid-June.
Wow, because the Pope's theory, I was reading about this on the Catholic.org website, is that prayer doesn't just result in God listening and doing something, supposedly, that prayer changes the person who is praying, that it makes them, I don't know, maybe they'll bond better in somewhere. Now, the Pope keeps talking about prayer and action. And Mr. Ambassador, just trying to be a little provocative for TV's sake here, I got to say, if prayer really works, why does the Pope need to call for action? Can't I just pray and God will take care of it?
Well, I think that that's getting a little theological for me. But what we've seen in the world of diplomacy is that prayer, in the sense of appealing to higher spirituality and appealing to the highest principles of humanity, are important principles of diplomacy and governance. And so if these guys come and pray and as a result feel some kind of bond and feel some kind of inner peace with themselves, maybe that will give a higher level discussion that can be picked up by the secular powers and resume the fledgling peace talks that really haven't gotten anywhere since President Clinton's era with Ehud Barak.
Yeah, those peace talks really have been utterly stalled, and it feels like in more recent times the Obama administration putting far more pressure on the Israelis to make concessions than it is on the neighbors, who are still, some of them, vowing that the Jewish state should not exist, and they're kind of fixed on annihilation. Should the Pope be doing more to call out the enemies of Israel that are still saying that they want to destroy Israel?
Well, I think he's calling against all forms of violence on all sides, whether it's Palestinian suicide bombers or the wall that prevents Christians from going into Bethlehem. You know, I think that there's plenty of problems on all sides of that thing, and you know, we have a president now who has gone a little more to one side, and I think we've lost some of the balance that we had under George Bush and Bill Clinton, where they sought a a dialogue based upon mutual respect.
Right. You know, I remember meeting President Clinton, former President Clinton, in Davos for a few minutes a couple of years ago, and he said a rather interesting point. He said, you know, in the Middle East, as much as we've got people hating each other, he said if you could just have good economic growth on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, if Palestinian youths growing up actually were able to find a good job and buy a refrigerator for their family, he said, you know, these young people would find it a lot less compelling to strap a bomb on their chest and to go ahead and do that if only we had economic growth. One last thing, quick answer, Mr. Ambassador. Pope Francis is praying and he's calling for action. He wants to end world hunger and poverty by 2025. Is he going to make that happen?
Oh, I don't know if he'll make it happen, but hopefully he will at least advance the ball.
Yeah, and at least he's talking about it. There's that. Right. Well, he's clearly a beloved figure for the media. He sells an awfully great message, and I'm sure it's better the world has someone like that up there talking than it doesn't. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Okay, and up next, the best of Gimme 5 right here on the Steve Malzberg Show with me, Dennis Neal.